Simply put, the ancient Egyptian timeline goes something like this. The pre-dynastic period, before 31,000 BCE, into the early dynastic period, which ended at 2686 BCE. The Old Kingdom begins at 2686 and ends at 2181 BCE, followed by the first intermediate period, ending in 2125 BCE. The Middle Kingdom ends in 1650 BCE and is followed by the second intermediate period, which ends in 1550 BCE. The New Kingdom comes next and ends in 1069 BCE. The New Kingdom is followed by the third intermediate period, then the late period, and then the Ptolemaic period. We will not be getting this far today. Our story is primarily set in the second intermediate period, with the reign of the Hyksos.
Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Amory Swift and today we're going to talk about the Near East. As we look back throughout history, we see the big picture. And it's important to remember that this is the big picture to the lives of everyday people, the little guys. History cannot be taught in absolutes. It's really important that we don't think of history in absolutes. We don't teach history in absolutes. And sadly, that's the pitfall that we fall into all the time. I know growing up, learning my history in high school, thinking back to it, a lot of these ideas were presented to me as absolutes. This is what happened. This is when it happened. This is what it was. This is why it happened. And the truth of the matter is, we just don't actually know that. We are still learning and still understanding the past. And I don't know if we will ever truly understand the past. We barely understand the present. And we can talk to everyday people today. And we still barely have any clue what is happening. I have no idea what's going on in my world. Just kidding. I do. I promise. I'm not completely checked out. I just don't always understand it. Thanks to history, we can use the process of elimination. We can identify what leads to prosperity, what leads to violence, and what leads to division, what leads to dissent, what leads to new inventions, what leads to advancements in culture and society and understanding. Long ago, in the 15th dynasty, Egypt was reigned over by a foreign power. These people are known today as the Hyksos. They're a group of Asiatic people, and they are surrounded in misinformation and in the unknown today, among scholars, archaeologists, and everyday people. And they brought to Egypt incredible inventions, the one that we probably take for granted today, like the horse-drawn chariot and the compact bow. And these things, mixed with culture that they introduced, really set the foundation and led to what we know as the New Kingdom today. Dr. Anna Latifa Morad, I think is how you say it. I hope I'm saying it right. She wrote several books on the Hyksos, and I am gathering a lot of my information from her. I'll link her down below, and in the description, I'm just gonna have really where I get all my information, all the studies that I've read in this, and the people that I'm like, you should look into their work. They're fucking awesome or whatever. But she has really delved deeply into this. I mean, she's written several books on the matter, and all of them are amazing. You should read them, basically. Anyways, so Josephus, I want to jump to Josephus, and that might feel a little bit like a leap, but the thing is, for a long time, what we understood about the Hyksos came from Josephus. Josephus was a Roman Jew. He was some guy, just some dude who lived a very long time after. So for reference, the Hyksos were during the 15th dynasty, so think like 1650 BCE, okay? And then Josephus is from 37 CE, about. So like, around the time that Jesus of Nazareth was probably crucified, and that's a long ways away. And so we gathered a lot of our information from this Jewish Roman dude from like 1,000-something years later, and he got a lot of things right. There's a lot of things we still are like, yeah, Josephus, I can fuck with that. But also, Josephus said things like, Hyksos meant shepherd kings. And so for a long time, everyone was like, you know, the Hyksos, those shepherd kings, probably the Israelites, because they were shepherds. A lot of people were shepherds. Anyways. And so we were really blindsided by that for a long time. And it wasn't until more recently, I say recently, but you should understand that I consider the medieval period too recent. So take that with a grain of salt. But it wasn't until more recently that we understood that the term Hyksos actually comes from an Egyptian title. It's Heka Chesut. Heka is like, basically just means ruler of foreign lands in ancient Egyptian, or ruler over foreign lands or from foreign lands, something like that. And Josephus claims that they conquered Egypt without striking a blow, that they completely took over and forced into submission, and that was that. And that was the reign of the Hyksos. And a lot of our writing that we understood, that we used to understand the Hyksos, came from after the Hyksos. So Josephus sounded like he was talking facts. A lot of these records that we used are steles from the New Kingdom, so following the Second Intermediate Period. These records come from a different time, and they have a very specific goal in mind. I specifically think of Hatshepsut in the 18th dynasty, and she introduced a lot of these ideas, and we have lots of painting steles, the Kamos stele, and just, there's a lot. And that's my cat. His name is Namu. If anybody in the comments can tell me where that comes from, I'll give you a big thumbs up. So basically, these writings have a very specific goal in mind. They're being written by the winners. They're being written by the people who took power away from the Hyksos and are now ruling. Hi. So these documents are being written by the people who took power away from the Hyksos, the people who are now ruling over the people that the Hyksos used to rule over. And so as a way to kind of pacify the masses and to solidify their claim to the throne, they started making these specific writings. And it was tied a lot into the god Re, or Ra, and Ma'at. Now, these are some religious terms, some theological terms from ancient Egypt, so I just want to delve into that really fast. So like, quick side note. So the Egyptian belief and theology, without getting too in the weeds, is very unique. They've got a diverse set of gods on their pantheon, and they believe in an afterlife, but they also believe that they're going to be able to, they have the opportunity to be with the gods in the afterlife. Now, their traditions bore some unique traits. I mean, most of it is incredibly unique, but specifically the idea that the pharaoh is in direct relation with the gods, that he almost is a god himself, that he communicates with the gods for the people, that he was sent here by the gods to rule over them, and it's all in the name of Ma'at. And Ma'at doesn't have like a perfect English translation. Basically what it means is the opposite of chaos. It means order, it means stability, it means unity. Ma'at is kind of like the ideal utopia, and it can only be achieved when Upper and Lower Egypt are united under the pharaoh sent by the gods. Ma'at was a central player in Egyptian theology, and it's really interesting because whenever someone is trying to lay this claim to the throne, whenever someone's really trying to convince that they are the rightful ruler of Egypt, they want to blame their predecessors on ruining Ma'at, on causing chaos, because they're not set by the gods. And we see this a lot with the Hyksos in the later writings. Like, of course, later rulers were shitting on the Hyksos. They needed the people to know that they were no longer in charge. Even though their kings had been expelled, it was the pharaoh who was keeping Ma'at. He was the pharaoh who had the claim to the throne. In order to appease the gods and keep them safe, they needed to accept that the Hyksos were gone. So these later records, in part, are largely just propagandic pieces. And propaganda is a modern term. It's not like Egyptian pharaohs were sitting with their court in a meeting discussing the best form of propaganda to employ on their citizens to win them over. Propaganda is a modern term. And so the definition, as the dictionary says, I'm gonna read it, is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Great examples of just like infamous propaganda pieces include a lot of World War II era things. They used posters and music and media, really all forms of media they had access to. I think the ones that really come to my mind fastest that had a crazy impact are their films. Movies like The Uproar of Damascus from 1939 and I Accuse from 1941. These movies are straight propaganda and are not very good. Don't support them. Don't do that. Don't support Nazi stuff. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't support Nazi stuff. But anyways, back to the New Kingdom. So a lot of these things that we have now, like Egyptians in the New Kingdom, they weren't making movies, they weren't printing posters. They were commissioning steles, or stelas. Notably, I want to point out the stele of Kamos. This depicts the defeat of the Hyksos in Egypt, and we used it for a really long time. And even jumping back to Josephus, he was a Roman Jew. He primarily wrote about the Jews. This is what his thing was, what he tied things back into. He focused on the Jewish wars, he recounted Jewish history, and the Jews in the Near East, and Josephus lived in the Common Era, in CE. So not only was he from a very different culture, he was from a different time. Like, it wasn't just like Josephus was a Jew in the same time living in the Levant. No, he's from a very different time. 1650 BCE, 37 CE. That's a big difference. So at first, when we first started, as scholars, as we first started delving into the Hyksos, we had two primary sources of information. One was the steles, like the propagandic stuff that came after the Hyksos, and two was Josephus, who was far removed and was probably going a lot off of oral tradition and the propagandic stuff that we go off of. So it's like, not to say that those things should be expelled from the conversation altogether, we should talk about them. We need them because we don't have all the information and we need to be using the process of elimination. The important thing is we can't focus on those. Those can't be the central idea of it all. Now jumping to archaeology, which is just some really interesting stuff. If you want to learn more about archaeology, I am not the foremost expert in it. I love archaeology. I've been on digs. Archaeology is my minor. I love it. But there are people who do archaeology specifically, and that's just their thing. And that's not just my thing. I am specifically ancient Near East. The writings, the archaeology, I'm Near East. I like that. That's where I go. There. And so, if you want better descriptions of archaeological stuff, I'd suggest people like Mini Minuteman. I really love his videos. And I'll drop the papers that I got a lot of this information from down below in the description, so we'll look into that more as well. But some of the archaeological information about the Hyksos are from the site Tel Dabʿa, and this is the modern name for the Hyksos capital, Avaris. Artifacts that we find here show a lot of trade and interconnectedness between Avaris in the Nile Delta and the Levant and other Asiatics, specifically in the Petra area. There's this archaeological thing where you identify things as specific cultures, and it's not cultures like you think of them today, like this is my culture. It's material culture. Like you can identify reoccurrences and patterns from physical items left behind. This material culture and the remains of the people who lived there really led into a lot of what our discoveries about the Hyksos are at now. And that is immigration. It wasn't just a big old massive overthrow of the Egyptian empire by the mighty Asiatic Hyksos. It was immigration, but that's not as exciting and not great for propaganda. So, a lot of what we have in Egypt too are the tombs. It's very dry there, and burial sites were crafted with intense care, and so they have survived really long, and we have a lot of them to go off of. Now in Avaris, we also have a lot of burial sites, and we're able to test the skeletal remains of these people who lived here during this time, specifically the Middle Kingdom, the Second Intermediate Period, and the New Kingdom. And there is one archaeological study in the Avaris area that I find incredibly compelling and really pushes my point and my belief in the immigration theory of it, because history is just a theory, really. And that is the study of the dental isotopes. Now, I'm no dental person, and like I said, I am not the foremost expert on archaeological, scientifical stuff. So again, the study dropped below. Please turn to that, as I might not be the best at explaining this. Basically, the study is in the dental isotopes of the skeletal remains. The study was headed by the Hyksos Enigma Project. They originally went in looking for skeletal remains in Avaris and studying the skeletal remains, but quickly they were able to be like, the teeth have held up the best. Let's focus on the teeth. And they shifted their focus to what is referred to as dental morphological studies. And basically, apparently this relied on tooth ontogeny. And for any other dumbasses out there like me who are like, I've never even heard of that word, let alone know what it is, basically, the Colgate official website really helped me out, because a lot of the Google Scholar and things I found in the library, they were just too confusing for me. So the Colgate website is where I get this information, and that basically is just saying that tooth ontology is just a way of saying the developmental stages of teeth, how they grow. It's also known as odontogenesis. Basically, there are 5 stages of tooth development, and the 5th one is when your teeth come out of the gums. That's the very last stage. And I'm going to read just a little excerpt from the paper, and just from like the official study stuff. It says, the dental anthropology using stable isotopes, non-metric trait analysis, and indicators of health and stress have shown foreign origin for the Tel Dabʿa population. And more than that, we can see how staggered those of foreign origin really were. The bodies didn't all just get buried in the same year. These were people who lived all throughout the Middle Kingdom and the Second Intermediate Period and whatnot. I would even guess, and I'd go as far as to say that some people are probably buried there from before that time period. Either I'm just an idiot and I haven't read that there were people from older, or it hasn't been discovered. I don't know. But I feel confident enough to say that I do not believe that the Hyksos were one ethnic group of people who came in at one period of time and conquered Egypt, but rather an assortment of people from the Middle East who gradually moved into Egypt to the Nile Delta area because of the great farmland it provided. The Nile delta is amazing. All along the Nile, that's where the civilizations in Egypt happened, because the Nile was a godsend, and they literally believed it was sent from the gods. And it's because the Nile has predictable flooding. It's reliable. And because of this flooding, it just led to some beautiful farmlands. And they always knew that they were going to be able to get their food. And that's why times of drought really threw Egypt off, especially Egypt, because they relied so heavily on not only the Nile, but the flooding of the Nile. And so I think this predictable flooding, that is definitely a factor for people wanting to come into Egypt. But what most concerns me is seeing how the Hyksos were treated, being replicated on modern people, people being forcibly removed. Scare tactics and racist sentiments are spreading like wildfire in 2025 against the American immigrant population. These immigrants who, like the Hyksos, have brought so much good to our land, to our people. But there are people who want to justify their place in power, who want us to believe that them being in power saves us in some sort of way, just like the pharaohs who came after the Hyksos. The Hyksos naturally rose to positions of power. There is no archaeological evidence of any other option. They naturally rose to these positions of power because they immigrated and became a part of this Egyptian society. The culture in Avaris changed. It was different than the other parts of Egypt. It was mixed with these beautiful cultures from the Levant, from Egypt. The trade, the people, the languages, it all changed in Avaris. They rose to these positions slowly as they adapted to their environment, positions in the priesthood or in kingship. They introduced their own ideas and cultures, and that didn't strip away the Egyptian identity. In fact, a lot of them still used Egyptian text in their burials. I don't know of anyone that didn't use Egyptian burial text. And there was still this really beautiful Egyptian culture in Avaris, but it had just evolved in a way as it incorporated other people. Then the people who pushed out the Hyksos picked and chose what they wanted to keep and what they wanted to demonize with the rest of the Hyksos idea. This is what history shows us. And we don't have to go all the way back to the Hyksos in Egypt to see this happening. And I don't know all the details, but I know quite a bit about the day I live in, and I can identify similarities. With the opening of Alligator Alcatraz in Florida, I fear repetition of the past.
They're fast, but alligators, we're going to teach them how to run away from an alligator, okay? If they escape prison.
And I don't necessarily fear repetition of the Hyksos, because we live in a very different time.
It's a model going forward, Mr. President?
It can be. I mean, you don't always have land so beautiful and so secure. They have a lot of bodyguards and a lot of cops that are in the form of alligators. You don't have to pay them so much. But I wouldn't want to run through the Everglades for long. It will keep people where they're supposed to be.
But there are events, not even from a full 100 years ago, that replicate this in scary accuracy. This does not happen just every couple thousand years. This, sadly, happens a lot.
It's known as Alligator Alcatraz, which is very appropriate because I looked outside and that's not a place I want to go hiking anytime soon. But very soon this facility will house some of the most menacing migrants, some of the most vicious people on the planet.
So what can we do to solve it? What solution does history present to us? Because the Hyksos lived in Egypt for a long period of time before everything went south. So how did they live? What caused the change? These are the questions I want people to be asking themselves. These are the questions that keep me up at night, because I don't have all the answers, and nobody does. I can, however, identify wrong, identify evil, and identify inhumane treatment. I can see patterns, and no living soul deserves to be treated and gossiped about on a national or international level. The people that are removed have names, families, passions. They did then in the time of the Hyksos, and they do now. I'm so grateful for everyone who watched this whole video. Please like and subscribe, comment down below. Let me know if you have any questions or if you disagree with me in any way. And until next time.